The man with the baseball bat smiled like he already knew how this would end. He was wrong. Garrett Cole had taken the same route every morning since he got back to Halifax 3 weeks ago. Down Quinpool Road, past the coffee shop with the broken awning, onto the number 14 bus, heading toward the waterfront. He liked the routine. After 12 years in the Navy, routine was the only thing that made civilian life feel manageable. That and Kodiak. Kodiak was a German Shepherd. 4 years old, 78 pounds, trained by the Canadian Forces before Garrett had adopted him through a military working dog transfer program 18 months ago. Most people on the bus saw a big dog and moved to another seat. That was fine. Garrett preferred the extra space. He had chosen the rear bench, wide enough for both of them. Kodiak sat pressed against Garrett's left leg, eyes scanning the aisle the way he always did in new environments. Old habit. Good habit. The bus was about a third full. A woman in a nurse's uniform reading something on her phone. A young guy with headphones in nodding to music no one else could hear. An older man near the front with a paper bag of groceries on his lap. Normal Thursday morning. Cold outside. The kind of Halifax February that makes your eyes water before you even make it to the corner. Garrett had his jacket unzipped. His coffee was in his left hand. He was thinking about nothing in particular. That was new for him, learning to think about nothing. His therapist called it progress. The bus stopped at Robbery Street. 3 men got on. Garrett noticed them before the doors even finished opening. It was not a conscious decision. It was not. His brain had been calibrated over more than a decade to register threat before thought caught up. He did not move. He did not react. He simply filed the information away. The first one was the tallest. Maybe 6'2", heavy through the shoulders, wearing a gray hoodie with the sleeves pushed up past his forearms despite the cold. The second was shorter but thicker, with a shaved head and a red down vest. The third hung back slightly. Younger, maybe early 20s, with restless hands that kept moving in and out of his jacket pockets. They were not looking for a seat. They moved down the aisle with the kind of slowness that was deliberate. Casual in the way that people are only casual when they want to be seen being casual. The tall one said something to the guy with headphones. The young man looked up, pulled out one earbud, and the tall one held out his hand. Flat, palm up, waiting. The young man looked at the hand, looked at the 2 standing beside his seat, and reached into his pocket. He put his phone in the outstretched hand without a word. Garrett watched. The nurse across the aisle had stopped reading. She was very still. The tall one. Garrett was already thinking of him as Hoodie, the way he used to think of targets in terms of descriptors, until they had names. Moved to the next row. Same routine. Hand out. Wait. There is something about real danger that most people never understand until they are standing inside it. It does not announce itself with music or slow motion. It arrives quietly, and it smells like adrenaline, and it makes the whole world feel very small and very clear at exactly the same time. The older man near the front gave up his wallet without being asked. His hands were shaking. The man with the red vest laughed at something and pocketed the wallet. The younger one was watching the door to the driver's cabin. Garrett set his coffee down on the seat beside him. Kodiak shifted his weight. He could feel it too. Hoodie reached the row 2 seats ahead of Garrett. A woman with a child on her lap. Garrett had not noticed them earlier. The child had been quiet, pulled the little boy closer. Hoodie leaned over and said something. The woman shook her head. Hoodie said it again, louder this time. Garrett heard the word. He did not repeat it. It was the kind of word that does not need to be repeated. The woman's hand shook as she opened her purse. Hoodie took it. Then he looked up and saw Garrett. He saw a man in a plain gray sweater sitting in the back of a bus with a big dog. He probably saw someone easy, someone quiet. The dog was sitting calmly, and the man had no expression on his face, and there was a paper coffee cup next to him on the seat. "End of the line, pal," Hoodie said and moved toward him. Garrett did not say anything. Red vest followed. The younger one drifted closer too, though he stayed half a row back. "Hand it over," Hoodie said. "Phone, Wallet, whatever you've got." Garrett looked at him, not the aggressive stare that men use when they want to look dangerous, just a steady, even look, the look of a man who has already done the math. "I'm going to ask you once to step back," Garrett said. His voice was very quiet. Hoodie laughed. He had a good laugh, the kind that fills a space, the kind that is meant to embarrass you. "You're going to ask me once," he repeated, turning to Red Vest. "He's going to ask me once." Red Vest was not laughing. He was looking at the dog. "Hey!" Hoodie snapped his fingers in front of Garrett's face. "I'm talking to you." Kodiak moved. Not aggressively, just a quarter turn of his body, a repositioning that put him more directly between Garrett and the two men standing in the aisle. His ears were forward. His tail was low and still. Hoodie looked down at the dog. Something shifted in his expression. Then he did the thing that made the nurse 3 rows back press herself against the window. He kicked him. Not hard enough to injure. It was more of a shove with his boot, the kind of dismissive contact meant to establish dominance over something he considered beneath him. Kodiak absorbed it without a sound. He did not yelp. He did not flinch. He turned his head and looked the man who had kicked him with a focused, intelligent calm that was somehow more unnerving than any growl. Garrett stood up. He was not a large man in the way that Hoodie was large. He was lean and he moved without wasted motion. And when he rose from that back bench, the whole back of the bus seemed to get quieter. "Bad call," Garrett said. What happened next took about 11 seconds. Garrett did not explain what he was going to do. He did not negotiate. He had offered the one warning. And the warning had not been taken, and now the time for talking was over. He stepped into the aisle, and the tall man swung. A big haymaker, the kind that works on people who are not expecting it and who are not trained. And Garrett moved inside the arc of it and put his forearm across the man's wrist and redirected the momentum into the seat frame beside them. The crack was loud. Hoodie went down. Red Vest was already moving and Garrett pivoted, keeping the downed man between himself and the incoming threat, and caught Red Vest mid-lunge with a controlled counter that put him sideways across 2 seats. The younger one at the back had his phone out now, not to film, to make a call. Garrett glanced at him. "Put the phone down." He did. Kodiak had not moved from his position. He was still watching, still calm, a professional waiting for a command that had not come and did not need to come. The driver had stopped the bus. They were at the corner of Windsor and Cunard, nowhere in particular, and the driver was on his radio, and outside the windows, a few people on the sidewalk had noticed something was happening and had stopped to look. Hoodie was on the floor holding his wrist. Red Vest was trying to sit up. The younger one was just standing there with his phone at his side, and his face had changed completely from the expression he'd worn when he got on the bus. That expression was gone. None of them looked like they had expected this. They never do. The police arrived 7 minutes later, 2 cruisers. Garrett had moved back to his seat. He had Kodiak's leash in his left hand, loose, the way you hold a leash when the dog does not need it. He had given his name to the driver. He was finishing his coffee when the officers came through the doors. The younger one tried to say something about the dog. Something about how Garrett had no right to let the animal threaten them. One of the officers looked at the young man, then looked at the 3 people he was taking statements from who all described what had actually happened, and did not respond to the claim. Garrett gave his statement simply. He was factual. He left nothing out and added nothing extra. He was a petty officer in the Royal Canadian Navy on a scheduled leave. The dog was a retired Canadian Forces working dog under his personal care. He had identified a threat, issued 1 verbal warning, and responded when the warning was disregarded and the animal was struck. The officer taking his statement paused at that last part. "The dog was struck?" "Yes. And that's when you intervened?" Garrett looked at him. "I was going to intervene either way. That just settled the timing." He expected that to be the end of it. It was not. A day and a half later, Garrett's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. He did not recognize the area code. The message was short. It said only, You made a mistake getting involved. There are people in this city who take care of their own. Back off. Back off from what, exactly? He had not been investigating anything. He had been on a bus. Garrett sat with that message for a long moment. Kodiak was asleep on his feet, heavy and warm against his socks. Outside, Halifax was doing what Halifax does in February. Gray sky, cold rain. Wind off the harbor that cut through everything. He typed back one word. Who is this? No response. He forwarded the message to the officer who had taken his statement, a woman named Sergeant Arsenault, and flagged it as potentially relevant. She called him back within the hour. Her voice was careful in a way that told him she was choosing her words. The 3 men from the bus, she said. The charges are going to be difficult. Why? A pause. The wallet that was taken from the older gentleman, Mr. Fitzgerald, was recovered from one of them. That is, straightforward. But the organization these men are connected to, Garrett, I have to be honest with you. We have been watching this group for about 14 months. They have ties to people in this city who make it complicated. How complicated? Another pause. Longer. The kind of complicated where people who file complaints sometimes find their complaints were misfiled, or where witnesses have trouble remembering what they saw. Garrett was quiet for a moment. He looked at the message on his phone again. Who are they connected to? He asked. Sergeant Arsenault said, I cannot tell you that on a phone call, which was itself an answer. He met her the next day at a coffee shop on Agricola Street. The kind of place with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls and nobody paying attention to the table in the back corner. She was in plain clothes. She looked tired in the way that people look when they have been carrying something for a long time without being able to put it down. She told him about a man named Brennan Foyle. Foyle was a Halifax City councillor. He had been on council for 9 years. He was well liked, photographed at charity events, quoted in local papers about community safety initiatives. He was also, Arsenault believed, the financial backer of at least 3 criminal organizations, operating in the north end of the city, the group from the bus included. He provided legal protection through contacts in the department. He provided money for bail. He provided information about which investigations were active and which could be made to disappear. The 3 men on the bus were not foot soldiers. They were collectors, operating a protection racket across a string of small businesses and the transit routes they serviced. The phone they had taken from the young man with the headphones was not just a phone. It contained photographs. The kid had taken a Foyle meeting with the group's leadership in a parking garage off Barrington Street 3 weeks earlier. The kid, his name was Tobias, 19 years old, worked at a kitchen supply store on Spring Garden Road. Had not known what he was photographing. He had been in the right place and had taken a photo of a man in a good coat shaking hands with someone he didn't recognize, and had thought nothing of it until the men came for the phone. Tobias is currently staying with relatives in Truro, Arsenault said. He is safe, but the photographs are time-stamped and geotagged, and if they become evidence, Foyle is finished, Garrett said. She nodded. Slowly. What does your department say about this? She looked at her coffee. My department says there is insufficient evidence to bring charges against a sitting city councillor based on photographs that were taken without context, and that any competent defense attorney would argue out of court. She looked up. What my department does not know is that I have been building a parallel file for 11 months. Financial records, witness statements from 3 business owners who were willing to speak off the record, documentation of 2 incidents where evidence was logged and then quietly disappeared from our system. She paused. I was planning to take it to the RCMP this month, and then your 3 friends from the bus made things complicated. How? Because now Foyle knows someone is connecting the dots, and he has very limited patience with complications. The message from the unknown number made more sense now. Garrett thought about it for a long time after he left the coffee shop. He walked back along Agricola in the cold, Kodiak moving steadily at his left side. And he thought about how strange it was that he had come home for 3 weeks of leave to rest and do nothing, and had somehow ended up here. He thought about the woman on the bus with the little boy, about Mr. Fitzgerald's shaking hands, about Tobias, 19 years old, sitting in Truro not fully understanding why. He thought about what Arsenault had and what she still needed. That night he called a man named Chief Petty Officer Durant, who was currently stationed at CFB Halifax, and who owed Garrett a favor that neither of them had ever spoken of directly, but that both understood perfectly. He explained what he needed, not resources, not backup, just information on 2 specific names. The leader of the group Foyle was backing, and the intermediary Arsenault had not been able to identify who moved money between Foyle and the organization. Durant said he would see what he could find. He called back in 4 hours with 2 names and 3 addresses. What happened over the next 6 days was not dramatic in the way people imagine when they hear the word operation. There were no explosions. There was no car chase through downtown Halifax. There was Garrett, moving quietly through a city he had grown up in and left at 18 and barely recognized, gathering what Arsenault needed. He tracked the intermediary, a man named Webb, who worked as a property manager for 3 buildings in the North End and used his access to the buildings to move cash without attracting attention. He documented the pattern over 4 days. Same coffee shop, same envelope, same route. He photographed what he could from distances that did not require him to get close. He spoke twice more with Arsenault, in person, never by phone. He found Tobias's photographs on the 2nd day, a backup copy the kid had uploaded automatically to a cloud account and then forgotten about. Tobias himself remembered it once. Garrett asked him the right question. The kid drove back from Truro to sign the consent form that allowed Arsenault to access the account legally. He sat with Kodiak in a parked car outside a warehouse on Kempt Road for 9 hours on the 5th night, watching and waiting, which was the part of the job most people found unbearable, and which Garrett found simply mechanical. He had learned long ago how to quiet his mind into something close to stillness. Kodiak slept across the back seat with his chin on the headrest. On the 6th night, Arsenault coordinated with the RCMP. They came in at 3 in the morning, 2 units, organized and clean. The way it is when the operation has been properly prepared, and there are no leaks because the only people who know are the ones who needed to know. Webb was arrested at his apartment on Gottingen Street. The warehouse was searched. The financial records that Arsenault had spent 11 months assembling, combined with what Garrett had documented in 6 days, were enough. Brennan Foyle was arrested at his home in Clayton Park at 4:15 in the morning. His wife came to the door first. The photograph of him being escorted to a police vehicle in his bathrobe, taken by a CBC journalist who had been tipped off anonymously, was on the front page of every news site in the province by 8 a.m. Garrett saw it on his phone from the hotel room where he had been staying since his leave started. He looked at the photo for a moment. Then he put the phone down. Kodiak was watching him from across the room with the attentive, searching expression that the dog sometimes had in quiet moments. A look that Garrett had come to think of, maybe anthropomorphically, as concern. "We're good," Garrett told him. Kodiak put his head back down. Sergeant Arsenault called that afternoon. She thanked him in the direct, professional way of someone who does not make a habit of large gestures. He said he had not done much. She said that was not true and that they both knew it. He said he was glad Tobias was safe. "He asked about you," she said. "He wanted me to tell you something." "What?" "He said he's sorry he didn't say anything on the bus, that he should have said something." Garrett was quiet for a moment. He was 19, and there were 3 of them, he said. He did exactly what a 19-year-old should do. A pause. "I'll tell him that. Tell him to back up his photos more regularly." She laughed. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. It sounded like something that had been waiting a while to come out. His leave had 4 more days in it. He spent them quietly. He walked the waterfront in the mornings with Kodiak. He ate fish and chips from a place on Lower Water Street that had been there since before he was born. He called his mother in Dartmouth twice. He slept better than he had slept since coming back. On his last morning, he took the number 14 bus again. Same route, same seat in the back. Kodiak pressed against his left leg, watching the aisle with calm, intelligent eyes. The bus was quiet. Cold light through the windows. A woman reading. A man with groceries. The ordinary rhythm of an ordinary morning in a city that did not know what had happened in it and did not need to. Garrett drank his coffee and watched Halifax move past the windows, and thought about nothing in particular. That, his therapist would say, was progress. There are men who carry their strength loudly, who make sure you see it, who remind you of it, who need you to know. And then there are men like Garrett, the kind who sit quietly in the back of a bus and wait and say very little and hope, genuinely hope, that none of it will be necessary. It was necessary. It almost always is, for men like that. And when it was over, when the work was done, and the city was a little safer than it had been, and the people who had been frightened could breathe a little easier, Garrett simply finished his coffee, clipped on Kodiak's leash, and stepped off the bus at his stop. He did not look back. That was the narrator, speaking now, the one who watched from outside, who saw what Garrett could not see about himself. The thing about men like Garrett is that they are never the story to themselves. The story, to them, is the woman with the boy on her lap, or Tobias in Truro, or Mr. Fitzgerald shaking hands. The story is always someone else. But it was him. It was always him.